The violin's song echoed through the metal corridors of New Vienna Station, floating past the sleeping quarters and into the common areas where people from dozens of worlds gathered to rest. Karolina Martinez pressed the instrument closer to her chin and let her fingers dance across the strings. She had been playing for 3 hours straight, but her arms felt strong and her heart felt light. At 15 years old, Karolina had already spent half her life aboard this massive space station that orbited the third planet in the Centauri system. New Vienna was humanity's cultural center, a place where artists, musicians, and performers from Earth came to share their gifts with the galaxy. Her parents had brought her here when she was 7, carrying nothing but their old guitars and dreams of making music among the stars. The station buzzed with activity, even during the night shift. Alien traders walked through the corridors alongside human families. The blue-skinned Arcturians with their tall, graceful forms moved like dancers. The short, furry Betelgeusians chittered to each other in their musical language. Even the rock-like vegans seemed to enjoy the constant stream of human music that played throughout the station. Karolina loved watching them all. Each species brought something different to the galaxy, but humans had found their special place as the entertainers and storytellers. While other races built amazing technology or commanded powerful armies, humans made people feel things. They made them laugh, cry, hope, and dream. She finished her practice session and packed her violin carefully in its case. The instrument had belonged to her grandmother back on Earth, and before that, her great-grandmother. The wood was old and worn smooth by generations of fingers, but it still sang like an angel when she played it. Walking through the station's main plaza, Karolina waved to the night vendors selling food from a dozen different worlds. Mrs. Garcia ran a small cafe that served the best coffee in 3-star systems, while Mr. Kim's noodle stand always had a line of hungry customers no matter what time it was. She was heading home when the emergency sirens began to wail. The sound cut through the peaceful night like a knife. Red lights flashed along the walls, and a voice boomed from the speakers in perfect Federation standard. All residents report to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Incoming refugee ships require immediate assistance. Karolina had heard these announcements before. New Vienna often served as a safe harbor for people fleeing wars, disasters, or other troubles. The station's medical bay and refugee center could handle thousands of displaced beings at once, but tonight felt different. The sirens seemed more urgent, and she could see worry in the faces of the adults around her. Even the alien visitors looked concerned, their various features showing expressions of fear that crossed all species barriers. Instead of going home, Karolina followed the flow of people toward the refugee center. She told herself she was just curious, but something deeper pulled her forward. Her violin case bumped against her leg as she walked, reminding her of its presence. The refugee center occupied an entire section of the station. When Karolina arrived, she saw chaos unlike anything she had experienced before. Medical teams rushed back and forth carrying stretchers. Station security officers tried to maintain order while processing hundreds of new arrivals. But the strangest thing was the silence. From the refugees themselves, Karolina had seen scared people before, traumatized survivors who had lost everything. They usually cried or called out for missing family members, or asked desperate questions about what would happen next. These refugees did none of that. They sat in perfect stillness, staring at nothing, their eyes empty of hope or fear or any emotion at all. What happened to them? She asked a passing medical officer. The woman, whose name tag read Dr. Martinez, paused long enough to answer. Zephyrian attack on the Kepler colonies. Some kind of new weapon. We can't figure out what they did, but these people just gave up. All of them at the same time. Karolina watched as the medical teams tried to help the refugees. They checked vital signs, administered medicine, offered food and water. The refugees accepted everything without resistance, but also without any sign that they cared about their own survival. It was like looking at living statues, breathing but not really alive. She found herself walking deeper into the center, past the official medical stations to where families had been separated into different areas. In one corner, she saw a group of children sitting on the floor. They were human children, probably from one of the farming colonies that Earth had established in the Kepler system. The children sat as still as the adults, their small faces blank and hopeless. One little girl, maybe 6 years old, held a stuffed animal, but didn't seem to see it. A boy about 10 stared at his hands, as if he had forgotten what they were for. Without thinking about it, Karolina opened her violin case. She had no official permission to be here, no training in medical procedures, or trauma counseling. But she knew how to make music, and music had always been her way of reaching people when words failed. She lifted the violin to her chin and began to play. The song that came from her fingers was one her grandmother had taught her years ago, a simple melody that spoke of home and safety and love that never ended. The notes floated through the refugee center, mixing with the sounds of medical equipment and hushed conversations. At first, nothing changed. The refugees continued to sit in their terrible stillness, and the medical staff continued their work around them. But Karolina kept playing, letting the music flow from her heart, through her fingers, and into the air. And the little girl with the stuffed animal blinked. It was such a small thing that Karolina almost missed it. But the girl's eyes focused for just a moment, looking around as if she was remembering where she was. The boy next to her shifted slightly, turning his head toward the sound of the violin. Encouraged, Karolina played louder and moved closer to the children. Her melody grew more complex, adding layers of hope and comfort that seemed to wrap around the listeners like a warm blanket. She played songs her parents had taught her, folk tunes from old Earth that carried the weight of generations. More children began to respond. Their empty stares became confused looks, and recognition, and something that almost looked like interest. One boy started crying, which should have been heartbreaking but instead filled Karolina with joy because it meant he could feel something again. The little girl with the stuffed animal suddenly hugged it tight and began to sob. An older girl reached out to comfort her, and soon several of the children were holding each other, their emotions flooding back like water through a broken dam. The medical staff noticed the change immediately. Dr. Martinez appeared at Karolina's side, watching in amazement as the children who had been unreachable just minutes before began to respond to questions and accept comfort. "Don't stop playing," the doctor whispered. "Whatever you're doing, it's working." Karolina played until her arms ached and her fingers were sore. She played until every child in that section of the refugee center had remembered how to feel, how to hope, and how to believe that tomorrow might be better than today. She played until the first real smiles appeared on faces that had been empty for days. When she finally lowered her violin, the refugee center had transformed. Children talked quietly with their families. Adults asked questions about their new temporary home. A terrible silence had been replaced by the normal sounds of people living, breathing and caring about their future. Dr. Martinez stared at Karolina with a mixture of wonder and confusion. "How did you do that? What was that weapon the Zephyrians used, and how did your music counteract it?" Karolina looked down at her violin, then back at the children who were now playing games and sharing stories with the medical staff. She didn't understand what had happened any more than the doctor did, but she knew one thing for certain. Her music had brought them back from wherever the Zephyrian weapon had sent them. Her simple, human music had defeated something that the Federation's most advanced medical technology couldn't touch. She was about to answer when her communicator chimed with an urgent message from Admiral Lisa Rodriguez, the station commander. The message was brief but clear. Report to the command center. Immediately for debriefing. As Karolina packed her violin and prepared to leave, she looked back at the refugee center one more time. The children were drawing pictures now, their faces bright with recovered hope. Whatever the Zephyrians had done to them, whatever weapon they had used to steal their will to live, it hadn't been strong enough to overcome the power of a simple song played with love. She had no idea that this moment would change the course of an entire war, or that her violin would become humanity's greatest weapon against an enemy that had learned to attack the soul itself. All she knew was that music had power, and tonight that power had brought the lost back home. The command center of New Vienna Station buzzed with activity even though it was 3 in the morning. Karolina walked through the sliding doors, her violin case still in her hand, and found herself surrounded by the most important people on the station. Admiral Lisa Rodriguez stood at the center of it all, her dark hair pulled back and her uniform crisp despite the late hour. Karolina Martinez, the Admiral said, turning to face her. What you did tonight in the refugee center has caught the attention of people much higher up the chain than me. Karolina shifted nervously from one foot to the other. She had never been in the command center before, and the walls covered with star maps and communication screens made her feel very small. I just played music, Admiral. I don't understand what's so special about that. Admiral Rodriguez gestured to a chair at the large conference table. Sit down, and I'll explain what we know. As Karolina took her seat, a holographic display appeared above the table, showing a map of the galaxy. Red dots marked dozens of star systems, and more appeared as she watched. 3 weeks ago, the Admiral began, the Zephyrian Empire launched what they call Operation Silence. They've been attacking Federation worlds with a new kind of weapon. Not bombs or lasers, or anything that destroys buildings, or kills people directly. Instead, they broadcast some kind of signal that makes people lose the will to fight, to hope, or even to live. The display zoomed in on one of the red dots. The first attack was on Proxima Station, a mining facility with 10,000 workers. When our rescue ships arrived, they found everyone sitting quietly in their quarters, waiting to die. They weren't hurt, but they had completely given up. They wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink, wouldn't do anything to save themselves. Karolina watched as more red dots appeared on the map. How many places have they attacked? 47 worlds and stations so far. Admiral Rodriguez replied. Over 2 million people affected. Our best scientists and doctors have tried everything. Medicine, therapy, advanced technology from the Arcturians, even the healing crystals from the vegan colonies. Nothing worked until tonight. The Admiral touched a control, and the display changed to show recordings from the refugee center. Karolina saw herself playing violin for the children, watched as their empty faces slowly came back to life. You did something in 30 minutes that our medical teams couldn't do in 3 weeks, Admiral Rodriguez said. You brought those people back from wherever the Zephyrian weapon sent them. We need to understand how. Before Karolina could answer, the doors opened and a tall man in a military uniform walked in. He was older than the Admiral, maybe 50, with kind eyes and graying hair at his temples. This is Commander Jake Sullivan, Admiral Rodriguez said. He runs a special division that most people don't know exists. Jake, meet our young musician. Commander Sullivan sat down across from Karolina and smiled. I've been watching the recordings of what you did tonight. Very impressive work. I still don't understand what I did, Karolina said. I just played music like I always do. That's exactly the point, Commander Sullivan replied. You played music like a human always does. With emotion, with feeling, with all the messy, complicated things that make us who we are. The holographic display changed again, showing brain scans and wave patterns that meant nothing to Karolina. The Zephyrian weapon works by targeting what we might call the emotional centers of the brain, Commander Sullivan explained. It convinces people that nothing matters, that there's no point in trying, that they should just give up and wait for the end. But why doesn't it work on everyone? Karolina asked. Because not everyone responds to it the same way, the commander said. The Zephyrians have evolved beyond emotion. They see feelings as weakness, inefficiency, something to be eliminated. Most other Federation species have done the same thing to some degree. They've made themselves more logical, more controlled, more cold. Admiral Rodriguez nodded. The Arcturians gave up strong emotion centuries ago to become better scientists. The vegans suppressed their feelings to make group decisions easier. Even the Betelgeusians, who seem playful, have learned to control their emotional responses. But humans never did that, Commander Sullivan continued. We kept all our feelings, even the ones that cause us trouble. We cry at sad movies we fall. In love with the wrong people, we get angry about things that don't really matter. Other species think we're primitive because of it. Karolina was beginning to understand. So the Zephyrian weapon works on everyone except humans, because everyone else has gotten rid of the parts of themselves that would fight back. Exactly, Commander Sullivan said. And your music, your very human music, can reach the parts of people that the weapon has locked away. You can remind them what it feels like to hope, to care, to want something better. The Admiral leaned forward. We want to offer you a position in Commander Sullivan's division. You'd be trained in what we call cultural warfare. You'd learn, too. Use your music as a weapon against the Zephyrian attacks. Karolina looked down at her violin case. The idea of using music as a weapon felt strange and wrong. Music was supposed to bring joy, to comfort people, to make them feel connected to each other. I don't want to hurt anyone. You wouldn't be hurting anyone, Commander Sullivan said gently. You'd be healing them. You'd be giving them back the parts of themselves that the Zephyrians stole. What would I have to do? Training first, the Admiral replied. You'd learn about the science behind what you did tonight. You'd practice with other musicians who have similar abilities. And then, when you're ready, you'd go to the places where the Zephyrian weapon has been used. You'd play your music and bring people back to life. Commander Sullivan activated another display, showing Federation ships and military formations. The Zephyrians aren't just using this weapon randomly. They're preparing for a full invasion. They attack a world with a psychological weapon first, then send in occupation forces to take control of people who can't fight back. If we can't find a way to counteract their weapon, they'll conquer the entire Federation without firing a single shot. Karolina thought about the children in the refugee center, how empty and hopeless they had looked before her music reached them. She thought about millions of people across the galaxy sitting in that same terrible silence, waiting for an end they couldn't prevent. Would I be the only one doing this? She asked. No, Commander Sullivan said. We've identified other human musicians who seem to have similar abilities. A drummer on Earth whose rhythms can inspire courage in terrified soldiers. A singer on Mars whose voice can calm panic attacks. A pianist on Europa whose music can heal trauma. You'd be part of a team. And you think we can really make a difference? Admiral Rodriguez smiled for the first time since Karolina had entered the room. I think you already have. Those children. You helped tonight? They're talking to their parents again. They're asking about their future, making plans, hoping for better days. That's not a small thing, Karolina. That's everything. Karolina opened her violin case and looked at the old instrument inside. Her grandmother had played this violin during the worst days of the Third World War, when Earth seemed like it might tear itself apart. Her great-grandmother had played it during the food riots of 2287, When people thought civilization might collapse, her family had always used music to bring light into dark times. "If I do this," she said slowly, "I want to make sure I'm still helping people, not just fighting a war." "The best way to help people right now is to fight this war," Commander Sullivan replied. "The Zephyrians want to take away everything that makes life worth living. They want to turn the galaxy into a place where no one hopes, no one dreams to make things better. Your music is the opposite of that. It's pure human spirit, and it's the most powerful weapon we have." Karolina closed the violin case and stood up. "When do we start?" Admiral Rodriguez and Commander Sullivan exchanged glances. "Your transport leaves for Earth in 6 hours, the Admiral said. "You'll train at the Cultural Warfare Academy in Geneva. The program usually takes 6 months, but we're going to try to get you ready in 6 weeks. 6 weeks? Karolina asked. "Is that enough time?" Commander Sullivan stood up and walked to the window that looked out at the stars. "It has to be. Intelligence reports suggest the Zephyrians are planning something big. If we're right, they're going to launch a massive attack on one of the Federation's core worlds within the next 2 months." "Which world?" Karolina asked. The commander turned back to face her, his expression serious. "We think they're going to attack Earth itself. They want to eliminate the source of the resistance before we can spread it to other species." Karolina felt a chill run down her spine. Earth was home to 10 billion humans, including her grandparents and most of her extended family. If the Zephyrians used their weapon there, it would be a disaster beyond imagination. "Then we'd better make sure I'm ready," she said. Admiral Rodriguez smiled and extended her hand. "Welcome to the Cultural Warfare Division, Lieutenant Martinez." As Karolina shook the Admiral's hand, she realized her life had just changed completely. She was no longer just a 15-year-old girl who played violin on a space station. She was now a soldier in a war that most people didn't even know was happening, fighting with the most human weapon of all. 6 weeks of training at the Geneva Academy had passed faster than Karolina thought possible. She had learned things she never imagined existed. The science of sound waves and how they affected the brain. The mathematics of emotion and how feelings could be measured and controlled. Most importantly, she had learned to fight, not with guns or swords, but with her violin and the power it carried. Now, she stood on the bridge of the Federation ship Starlight, watching the planet Kepler 442b grow larger on the main screen. The planet looked peaceful from space, with blue oceans and green continents that reminded her of Earth. But she knew the truth. 3 days ago, the Zephyrians had attacked this world with their silence weapon. 7 million colonists now sat in their homes and cities, waiting to die. "Final approach in 10 minutes, announced Captain Ryan Foster from his command chair. He was a young officer, maybe 30 years old, with the kind of steady voice that made people feel safe even in dangerous situations. "Lieutenant Martinez, are you ready for this?" Karolina checked her violin case one more time and nodded. "As ready as I can be, Captain." She wasn't alone on this mission. 3 other members of the Cultural Warfare Division stood beside her. Marcus Chun carried his drum set in a special military transport case. His rhythms could make scared people feel brave, could turn a crowd of frightened civilians into determined fighters. Elena Vasquez held her flute case like it contained something precious, which it did. Her melodies could heal the deepest emotional wounds and make broken hearts remember how to love. The 4th member of their team was Sam Thompson, a man in his 50s who had been playing bass guitar since before Karolina was born. His deep, powerful notes could rally entire armies and make people believe they could win against impossible odds. Commander Sullivan had trained them all, taught them to work together like parts of a larger instrument. They were humanity's first Cultural Warfare Unit, and this was their first real battle. "Remember what we practiced," Commander Sullivan said through their communication earpieces. "The Zephyrians have placed psychic amplifiers across the planet. These machines make their silence weapon stronger and spread it farther. Your job is to counteract those amplifiers with your music." Karolina looked at the tactical display showing their target area. The capital city of New Geneva sprawled across a river valley, home to 2 million people who now sat motionless in their buildings. Red dots on the map showed where Federation sensors had detected the Zephyrian amplifiers. "The enemy knows we're coming," Captain Foster said. "They've never faced this kind of attack before, but they'll try to stop us. Intelligence suggests they might increase the power of their amplifiers when they detect our countermeasures." "What happens if they do?" "That?" Elena asked. Commander Sullivan's voice crackled through their earpieces. "We don't know. This is the first time we've tried this. But remember your training. Human music gets stronger under pressure. The harder they push, the harder you push back." The ship shuddered as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the windows, Karolina could see the landscape rushing past below. Farms and forests that should have been busy with activity stood empty and silent. Even the animals seemed affected by the Zephyrian weapon, standing motionless in fields like statues. They landed at the spaceport outside New Geneva. The facility was completely quiet, with passenger ships sitting on the tarmac like sleeping giants. Ground crew workers stood frozen at their posts, their faces blank and hopeless. Captain Foster led a squad of Federation Marines off the ship first, checking for immediate threats. But there were no enemies to fight, no battles to win with traditional weapons. The Zephyrians hadn't needed to send soldiers to conquer this world. Their silence weapon had done all the work. "All clear," the captain reported. "The amplifiers are broadcasting at maximum power. I can feel it myself. It's like a weight pressing down on your mind, telling you that nothing matters." Karolina felt it too as soon as she stepped off the ship. A cold, empty feeling that tried to convince her that their mission was pointless, that they should just sit down and wait for the end. But her training kicked in, and she pushed the feeling away. "Remember," she told her teammates, "the weapon affects us too, but not as much as it affects everyone else. Stay focused on why we're here." They moved through the spaceport and into the city beyond. New Geneva should have been bustling with activity, hovercars flying between buildings, people walking on the sidewalks, children playing in parks. Instead, it was like walking through a museum of frozen moments. A woman sat on a park bench, staring at nothing. A man stood in the middle of a crosswalk, waiting for a light that would never matter to him again. Children sat quietly in a playground, not playing, not talking, not moving. "It's worse than the recordings made it look," Marcus said quietly. "That's why we're here," Sam replied, adjusting the strap on his bass guitar case. "To wake them up." They reached the center of the city, where Federation sensors had detected the strongest Zephyrian amplifier. It sat on top of the tallest building. Like a metal flower, its petals spread wide to broadcast despair in all directions. "This is it," Captain Foster said through their communicators. "Intelligence shows 3 more amplifiers around the city. You'll need to neutralize all of them to break the weapon's hold on the population." Karolina opened her violin case and lifted out her grandmother's instrument. The familiar weight felt comforting in her hands, a connection to generations of musicians who had used their art to fight darkness. "On my signal," she said to her teammates. She placed the violin under her chin and began to play. The melody that came from her strings was one she had composed during training, a song that spoke of home and hope and the refusal to give up. The notes rose into the air and seemed to push against the invisible weight of the Zephyrian broadcast. Marcus joined in with a steady rhythm on his portable drums, a heartbeat that reminded people they were still alive. Elena's flute added layers of comfort and healing, while Sam's bass provided a foundation of strength that seemed to make the ground itself more solid. At first, nothing happened. The people around them continued to sit in their terrible stillness, and the Zephyrian amplifier hummed with power overhead. Then the enemy responded. The amplifier's broadcast suddenly became stronger, trying to drown out their music with waves of despair so powerful that Karolina felt her knees buckle. The empty feeling pressed against her mind like a crushing weight, telling her that resistance was useless, that she should put down her violin and join the others in their silent surrender. But instead of stopping, Karolina played louder. Her violin sang with a power she had never felt before, as if the instrument itself was fighting back against the alien weapon. Her melody became more complex, more beautiful, more full of everything that made life worth living. The other musicians felt it too. Marcus's drums thundered with the rhythm of human determination. Elena's flute soared with the voice of hope itself. Sam's bass rumbled with the deep strength of a species that had never learned to quit. The battle was invisible, but real. 2. Different kinds of power clashed in the air above the city. The Zephyrian silence that demanded surrender, and the human music that refused to be quiet. Slowly, impossibly, their music began to win. The woman on the park bench blinked and looked, around, confused but alive. The man in the crosswalk took a step forward, then another. Children in the playground turned toward the sound of the music, their faces lighting up with remembered joy. "It's working," Captain Foster reported. "The amplifier's power is fluctuating. Keep playing." But the Zephyrians weren't finished. All 4 amplifiers around the city suddenly coordinated their broadcasts, creating a wall of despair so strong that windows began to crack from the psychic pressure. This was the moment Karolina had trained for, the test of everything she had learned. Instead of fighting the increased power, she embraced it. Her music became a reflection of the struggle itself. Not just hope, but hope in the face of hopelessness. Not just joy, but joy that refused to be crushed. Not just determination, but a specifically human kind of determination that grew stronger when everything seemed lost. Her violin screamed with defiance, and the sound shattered something in the Zephyrian broadcast. One by one, the amplifiers began to overload, their alien technology unable to process the complexity of human emotion when it was focused and directed like a weapon. The first amplifier exploded in a shower of sparks, then the second, then the third and fourth, their metal pedals crumpling as their psychic broadcasts collapsed. Suddenly, the weight lifted from the city. People everywhere began to move, to speak, to remember who they were and why they mattered. Parents called for their children. Workers returned to their jobs. The frozen museum of New Geneva came back to life in a rush of activity and noise and blessed human chaos. Karolina lowered her violin, her arms shaking from exhaustion, but her heart full of triumph. They had done it. They had taken their first world back from the Zephyrians, not with bombs or bullets, but with the power of music and the refusal to surrender. "Mission accomplished," Captain Foster reported to Federation Command. "New Geneva is free." As celebration erupted around them, Karolina looked up at the sky where Zephyrian ships were retreating to hyperspace. This was just the beginning. 3 months after the victory at New Geneva, the war had changed completely. Karolina stood on the observation deck of the Federation flagship Liberty, watching a fleet of 200 ships prepare for the largest cultural warfare operation in galactic history. Each ship carried human musicians, artists, and the equipment needed to broadcast their defiance across multiple star systems at once. The Zephyrians had not been idle. Since their defeat on Kepler 442b, they had attacked 12 more worlds, each time making their silence weapon stronger and more difficult to break. But humanity had been busy too, And what started as one small team of musicians had grown into something the galaxy had never seen before. Commander Sullivan walked up beside her, holding a datapad that glowed with tactical information. The final ships just arrived from the Tau Ceti colonies, he said. We now have over 3,000 human musicians ready for Operation Resonance. Karolina looked at the list of names scrolling across the pad. Musicians from every human world, playing every instrument imaginable. There were classical orchestras from Earth, rock bands from Mars, folk singers from the frontier colonies, and even street musicians who had learned their trade in the crowded cities of Europa. Are you sure this will work? She asked. We've never tried to coordinate so many people at once. That's what makes it powerful, Commander Sullivan replied. The Zephyrians think in terms of order and control. They can't understand how 3,000 different musicians can work together without being commanded by a central authority. They don't realize that's exactly what human music has always been about. Over the past months, Karolina and her original team had become something like celebrities in Federation space. Their victory at New Geneva had been broadcast across every human world, inspiring musicians everywhere to volunteer for the Cultural Warfare Division. Children practiced their instruments with new purpose, knowing that their music might one day save lives. Adults who hadn't played since school picked up guitars and pianos again, remembering the power that art could have. But fame wasn't what mattered to Karolina. What mattered was the growing network of liberated worlds, each one a note in a larger symphony of resistance that stretched across the galaxy. Have you finished the new composition? Commander Sullivan asked. Karolina nodded and pulled out her music sheets. Over the past month, she had been working on something unprecedented, a musical piece that combined elements from every human culture and could be played by any combination of instruments. They called it the Symphony of Liberation, and it was designed to be humanity's ultimate weapon against the Zephyrian silence. It starts with individual voices, she explained, showing him the opening measures. Each musician plays their own part, their own cultural tradition. But as the piece develops, all those different voices begin to harmonize. They don't become the same. They stay unique, but they work together to create something more powerful than any of them could manage alone. Marcus Chun approached them, carrying his drum cases as always. His face was serious, which was unusual for someone who normally joked his way through even the most dangerous missions. Karolina, we've got a problem. Intelligence reports that the Zephyrians are planning something big, bigger than anything they've tried before. Elena Vasquez and Sam Thompson joined them, both looking worried. The four musicians had become like family over their months of fighting together, reading each other's moods and thoughts almost without words. What kind of big? Sam asked, his deep voice rumbling with concern. Commander Sullivan activated a holographic display that showed the current state of the war. Red zones marked Zephyrian-controlled territory. Blue zones showed Federation space, and green zones indicated the worlds that the Cultural Warfare Division had liberated. They're massing their entire fleet here, he said, pointing to a system near the edge of Federation space. Intelligence believes they're planning to use a new version of their silence weapon, one powerful enough to affect entire star systems at once. If they succeed, they could knock out dozens of worlds simultaneously. Karolina studied the tactical display. The target system contained some of the Federation's most important industrial worlds, places where ships and weapons were built for the ongoing war effort. If those planets fell silent, the Federation's ability to fight back would be crippled. Where do they plan to strike from? She asked. The display zoomed in on a massive space station at the center of the enemy formation. It was unlike anything Karolina had ever seen, a twisted spire of metal and crystal that seemed to pulse with dark energy. They call it the Silence Generator, Commander Sullivan said. It's the size of a small moon, and completely covered with psychic amplifiers. Our scientists estimate it could broadcast the silence weapon across a range of 50 light years. Elena whistled softly. That's not a weapon. That's a doomsday device. Exactly, the commander replied. And they're planning to activate it in 72 hours. The observation deck fell quiet as the musicians absorbed this information. Everything they had fought for, every world they had liberated, could be undone in a single moment if the Zephyrians succeeded. So what's the plan? Marcus asked. Commander Sullivan smiled grimly. We're going to beat them to it. Operation Resonance launches in 6 hours. 3,000 musicians, broadcasting from 200 ships, all playing the Symphony of Liberation. Simultaneously. Can we reach the target area in time? Sam asked. We don't need to, Karolina realized, understanding the plan suddenly. We're going to broadcast the symphony through the Federation's communication network. Every human world, every space station, every ship in the fleet will receive the signal and add their own music to it. That's right, Commander Sullivan confirmed. Instead of attacking the silence generator directly, we're going to create a wave of music so powerful that it reaches every corner of Federation space before the Zephyrians can activate their weapon. We're going to make it impossible for their silence to take hold. Over the next few hours, the fleet prepared for the largest coordinated musical performance in galactic history. On Earth, the Global Symphony Orchestra took their positions in concert halls across 6 continents. On Mars, rock bands set up their equipment in the Great Dome cities. On Europa, folk singers gathered around campfires, their guitars ready to join the universal song. But it wasn't just professional musicians. Who would participate? The Symphony of Liberation had been designed so that anyone could contribute. Children with toy instruments, workers humming while they worked, even people simply clapping their hands in rhythm. All of it would add to the wave of human expression that was about to sweep across the galaxy. Karolina stood in the Liberties main broadcast chamber, her violin ready, surrounded by the other members of her team. Around them, dozens of Federation ships had formed a perfect circle, each one equipped with the most powerful communication arrays ever built. All stations report ready, announced Captain Foster from the bridge. We have confirmation from every human world and colony. Over 1 billion people are standing by to join the symphony. 1 billion people. Karolina felt the weight of that number, the responsibility of conducting such a massive performance. But she also felt the power in it. The Zephyrians had always seen humans as weak because of their emotions, their chaotic individualism, their refusal to think and act as one unified force. They were about to learn why that was humanity's greatest strength. Beginning broadcast. In 10 seconds, Captain Foster announced. 5.4. 3.2.1. Mark. Karolina lifted her violin and began to play. The opening notes of the Symphony of Liberation flowed from her instrument and instantly spread across the communication network. On Earth, orchestras joined in with the classical foundation of the piece. On Mars, electric guitars added their own wild energy. On the frontier worlds, folk instruments provided the rhythm of exploration and discovery. But the symphony was more than just music. It was every human emotion given voice at once. Joy and sorrow, hope and determination, love and defiance. All of it woven together into a tapestry of sound that no alien mind could fully comprehend. As the symphony grew, reports began flooding in from across Federation space. On worlds that had been partially affected by Zephyrian attacks, people were waking up as if from bad dreams. Soldiers who had lost the will to fight were picking up their weapons again. Scientists who had given up on their research were returning to their laboratories with renewed purpose. The wave of music swept outward from Federation space like a tide of human spirit. carrying with it everything that made their species unique and powerful. It spoke of a race that had crawled out of caves and reached for the stars, that had survived wars and disasters and never stopped believing in tomorrow. And somewhere in the depths of space, on a twisted station designed to spread despair across the galaxy, Zephyrian technicians watched their instruments in confusion as their silence weapon began to fail before it had even been activated. The Symphony of Liberation was not just countering their broadcast, it was making it impossible for despair to exist anywhere. Within 50 light-years of Federation space, for the first time in their history, the Zephyrians faced an enemy they could not understand, could not predict, and could not defeat with superior technology. 2 years had passed since Operation Resonance, and the war had reached a terrible balance. The Zephyrians could no longer use their silence weapon on any world where humans lived, but they had found other ways to fight. They attacked supply lines, destroyed communication networks, and targeted human colonies with conventional weapons. Worst of all, they had learned to avoid direct confrontation with the Cultural Warfare Division. Karolina, now 19 and a full commander in the Federation fleet, stood in the war room aboard the flagship Harmony. The holographic display showed the current state of the galaxy, and it was not good news. While the core Federation worlds remained safe behind their wall of music, the outer colonies were under constant attack. "They're being smart about it," Admiral Rodriguez explained to the assembled commanders. "They know they can't silence us anymore, so they're trying to cut us off from each other. If they can isolate the human worlds, they can deal with them one at a time using traditional warfare." Captain Foster, now promoted to Admiral after his success at New Geneva, pointed to several red zones on the map. "We've lost contact with the Vega colonies completely. The Centauri trade routes are under constant attack, and intelligence suggests they're preparing for something much bigger." Karolina studied the tactical information with the experience of someone who had fought in dozens of battles across the galaxy. Her original team was still with her. Marcus, Elena, and Sam had become legends in their own right, each one capable of leading their own musical units into combat. But the war had changed them all, hardening them in ways she sometimes regretted. "What's the intelligence about this bigger attack?" she asked. Commander Sullivan, his hair now completely gray from the stress of coordinating the cultural warfare effort, activated a new display. "Our spies report that the Zephyrians are planning to attack Earth itself. Not with their silence weapon, they know that won't work, but with the largest conventional fleet ever assembled." The room fell silent. Earth was the heart of human civilization, home to 12 billion people and the headquarters of the Cultural Warfare Division. It was also where the Symphony of Liberation was broadcast from, the source of the musical network that protected all human worlds. "How large a fleet?" Admiral Foster asked. 10,000 ships, Commander Sullivan replied. "Every vessel the Zephyrian Empire can spare. They're calling it Operation Final Silence. The plan is simple: destroy Earth and break humanity's spirit forever." Karolina felt a cold fear settle in her stomach. Her grandparents still lived on Earth, along with most of her extended family. More importantly, Earth was where new musicians were trained, where the next generation of cultural warriors learned to fight with music instead of weapons. "When?" she asked. "Our best estimate is 72 hours, Admiral Rodriguez said. "There, massing their fleet just outside the Sol system, waiting for the right moment to strike." Marcus stepped forward, his usual humor replaced by grim determination. "Then we need to get there first. How many ships do we have available?" "Not enough," Admiral Foster admitted. "The Federation can put together maybe 3,000 ships. At most, in a conventional space battle, we'd be outnumbered more than 3-1. Good thing we don't fight conventional battles," Elena said quietly. Karolina looked at her teammates, these friends who had become her family through years of war. An idea was forming in her mind, dangerous and probably impossible, but it might be their only chance. What if we don't try to fight their fleet? She said slowly. What if we go after their leadership instead? Commander Sullivan raised an eyebrow. Explain. The Zephyrians have always been controlled from the top down, Karolina continued. Their emperor makes all the decisions, and everyone else just follows orders. If we could reach him, if we could affect him the way we've affected other Zephyrian victims... You want to try to convert their emperor? Admiral Rodriguez asked. Karolina, he's not just any Zephyrian. He's been alive for thousands of years. He's the one who eliminated emotion from their entire species. If anyone would be immune to our music, it would be him. Maybe, Karolina said. Or maybe he's the one who needs it most. Think about it. He's so old that he probably remembers what his people were like before they gave up their feelings. He might be the only Zephyrian left who could understand what they've lost. Sam nodded slowly. It's crazy enough to work. But how do we get close to him? He'll be in the middle of their fleet, surrounded by the most advanced defenses in the galaxy. We don't fight our way through, Karolina replied. We let them capture us. The room erupted in protests, but Karolina held up her hand for silence. Listen to me. They want to destroy Earth, but they also want to capture the leaders of the Cultural Warfare Division. We're the ones who've been ruining their plans for 2 years. If we surrender ourselves, they'll bring us directly to their emperor. And then what? Admiral Foster asked. Even if you could affect him with your music, you'd be surrounded by thousands of enemy soldiers. Then we trust in the power of music to do what it's always done, Karolina said. We trust it to reach people who have forgotten how to feel, and we hope that some feelings are too strong to be completely destroyed. Over the next 24 hours, the plan took shape. It was insane, desperate, and probably suicidal, but it was also their best chance to end the war before Earth was destroyed. A small ship would carry Karolina and her team directly into the heart of the Zephyrian fleet, broadcasting a signal that would make them appear to be surrendering. The night before they left, Karolina stood alone in her quarters, holding her grandmother's violin. She had written letters to her family, recorded messages for the musicians who would carry on the fight if she didn't return, and made peace with the possibility that she might not survive the next few days. But she wasn't afraid. Over the past 2 years, she had learned that music was more than just sound waves and emotional manipulation. It was the voice of the human spirit itself, and that spirit had never learned how to surrender. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Marcus, Elena, and Sam entered without waiting for permission, their own instruments in hand. Couldn't sleep either? Marcus asked. Too much to think about, Karolina replied. You know, Sam said, settling into a chair with his bass guitar, we've never actually played together just for fun. Every time we make music, it's for a mission or training or some kind of battle. Elena smiled for the first time in weeks. That's a good point. How about we play something just because we want to? For the next hour, the 4 friends made music together without any military purpose, without any enemy to fight, without any world to save. They played old songs from their childhoods, folk tunes their grandparents had taught them, and melodies that came from their hearts. Instead of their training dot, it was the most beautiful music any of them had ever made. When they finally put their instruments away, Karolina felt ready for whatever was coming. Tomorrow they would fly into the heart of the enemy fleet and attempt something that had never been tried before. They would try to reach the soul of a being who had spent thousands of years teaching himself not to have one. But tonight, they had reminded themselves why they were fighting. Not just to win a war, not just to save Earth, but to preserve the part of humanity that could create beauty in the darkest moments. that could find hope when everything seemed lost, that could make music together even when facing the end of everything they loved. The next morning, their small ship launched from the Liberty and set course for the Sol system. Behind them, the Federation fleet prepared for what might be the final battle of the war. Ahead of them, 10,000 enemy ships waited in the darkness between stars. But Karolina was not afraid. She carried her grandmother's violin, her friends by her side, and the voice of humanity singing in her heart. Whatever happened next, the music would continue. The spirit that had driven humans from caves to stars would endure. And somewhere, in the cold depths of space, an ancient emperor who had forgotten how to feel was about to remember what his people had given up when they chose silence over song. The throne room of the Zephyrian flagship was a place of cold beauty and terrible silence. Walls of black crystal stretched upward into shadow, decorated with geometric patterns that hurt to look at too long. At the center of it all sat Emperor Vexthul, ancient beyond measure, his pale blue skin stretched tight over a frame that had not moved from that throne in over a century. Karolina stood before him, her hands bound, but her violin case still clutched against her chest. The Zephyrians had taken their weapons, but left them their instruments, not understanding that for humans there was no difference between the two. Marcus, Elena, and Sam stood beside her, their own instruments held like shields against the oppressive atmosphere of the ship. Around them, hundreds of Zephyrian soldiers waited in perfect silence, their emotionless faces turned toward their ancient ruler. So, the Emperor said, his voice like winter wind across dead stone, these are the humans who have caused us so much trouble, the ones who fight with noise and chaos instead of proper weapons. Karolina looked up at the being who had ruled the Zephyrian Empire for 3,000 years. He was tall and thin, with large black eyes that seemed to see everything and feel nothing. His hands, folded in his lap, had not moved in so long that dust had settled on them. "We fight with music," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "We fight with the part of ourselves that you threw away." Emperor Vexthul tilted his head slightly, the first movement he had made since they entered the room. "Threw away? We evolved beyond such primitive impulses. We became efficient, logical, pure. Your species clings to the emotional chaos that we wisely abandoned. And how has that worked out for you?" Marcus asked, his usual humor replaced by something harder. "You've conquered half the galaxy, but you can't understand why a 19-year-old girl with a violin keeps beating your armies." The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "You have delayed the inevitable, nothing more. In 6 hours, our fleet will destroy your homeworld. Your musical resistance will die with it, and the galaxy will finally know the peace of silence." Karolina opened her violin case and lifted out her grandmother's instrument. Immediately, dozens of weapons turned toward her, but the Emperor raised one dusty hand. "Let her play," he said. "I am curious to understand what makes your noise so effective against minds weaker than mine." She placed the violin under her chin and closed her eyes. For a moment, she thought about everything that had led to this moment. The children in the refugee center who had forgotten how to hope. The worlds she had helped liberate with nothing but music and determination. The friends who had stood by her through 2 years of impossible war. And then she began to play. The melody that came from her violin was unlike anything she had ever played before. It started soft and simple, like a lullaby her grandmother might have sung, but it carried within it the weight of human history. Every joy and sorrow, every triumph and tragedy, every moment when someone had chosen to keep going when giving up would have been easier. The music filled the throne room, flowing around the crystal walls and reflecting back in harmonies that seemed to come from the ship itself. But more than that, it filled the spaces between notes with something the Zephyrians had not felt in millennia. The simple, complicated, messy reality of being alive and caring about something beyond pure logic. Emperor Vexthol sat perfectly, still, but Karolina could see something changing in his ancient eyes. A flicker of confusion, then recognition, then something that might have been pain. "Stop," he whispered, but Karolina played on, and now her friends joined her. Marcus added a rhythm that spoke of heartbeats and footsteps and the endless march of life through time. Elena's flute sang of love lost and found, of children laughing and parents crying with joy. Sam's bass provided the foundation, the deep strength that held communities together through the worst storms. Together, their music painted a picture of what the Zephyrians had been before they chose silence over song. A picture of a people who had once felt deeply, loved fiercely, and created beauty for its own sake. The Emperor's perfectly controlled composure began to crack. His hands, motionless for decades, began to tremble. Dust fell from his robes as his chest rose and fell with breathing that had become ragged and desperate. "I said stop," he commanded, but his voice broke on the words. Around the throne room, something unprecedented was happening. Zephyrian soldiers, who had stood like statues for hours, began to move. Some dropped their weapons. Others reached out to touch each other's faces, as if seeing their comrades for the first time. A few began to make sounds that their species had not uttered in centuries, sounds of wonder, of sorrow, of recognition. The music was not just reaching the Emperor. It was spreading through the ship's communication system, carried on frequencies that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the parts of the Zephyrian mind that had been locked away but never truly destroyed. "You don't understand," the Emperor gasped, rising from his throne for the first time in 100 years. "We had to give up emotion. We had to choose logic over feeling. The wars, the chaos, the pain, emotion nearly destroyed us." Karolina looked at him with eyes full of compassion. "And what did silence give you instead? You conquered worlds, but you lost yourselves. You gained an empire, but you forgot why empires are worth having." Her violin sang with a new theme now, one that spoke of redemption and second chances. The melody wrapped around the Emperor, like arms offering comfort to someone who had been cold for far too long. "We remember," he whispered, and tears began to fall from his ancient eyes, the first tears a Zephyrian had shed in 3,000 years. "By the stars, we remember what we were." The transformation spread throughout the ship like ripples in a pond. In the engine rooms, Zephyrian workers stopped their tasks and began to hum along with the music. In the weapons bays, soldiers laid down their arms and embraced each other. In the communication centers, officers began broadcasting the music to the rest of the fleet instead of battle orders. On the bridge, Admiral Vekmer, the Emperor's most trusted commander, felt something stir in his chest that he had thought was gone forever. He looked at the tactical display showing Earth, defenseless and waiting for destruction, and made a choice that would have been impossible just moments before. Instead of giving the order to attack, he opened communication channels to every ship in the fleet. "All vessels," he announced, his voice thick with newly remembered emotion, "stand down. Repeat, all vessels stand down. We are ... we are going home." 10,000 Zephyrian ships, poised to destroy humanity's homeworld, simply stopped. Their crews, overwhelmed by the return of feelings they had forgotten they possessed, began the long process of remembering what it meant to be alive instead of merely existing. Emperor Vexthil collapsed back onto his throne, but now he was smiling. Through his tears, "What have you done to us?" he asked, but there was wonder in his voice instead of anger. "We gave you back what was always yours," Karolina replied, finally lowering her violin. "We reminded you that feeling things, even painful things, is what makes life worth living." The war was over, but more importantly, it had ended with transformation instead of destruction. The Zephyrian Empire would need time to rebuild itself around emotion instead of pure logic, to learn again how to create instead of just conquer. But they would have that time, because humanity had chosen to heal rather than destroy their enemy. Years later, Karolina would return to New Vienna Station as the director of the Galactic Conservatory. Students from dozens of species would come to learn that music was not just entertainment, but a bridge between hearts and minds across the universe. In the memorial garden outside the conservatory, a simple stone bore the inscription, "Always," a promise that no matter how dark the galaxy became, no matter how powerful the forces of silence and despair, the human spirit would endure. It would sing, it would hope, it would refuse to surrender. And somewhere among the stars, on worlds both human and alien, children would grow up learning that the most powerful weapon in the universe was not a gun, or a bomb, or a planet-destroying